The hammer struck bone and iron. A human throat answered with a hollow, metallic cry. Fear drives the first reactions in the room. The convict's hands claw at leather straps, the iron right's jaw tightens, and the guards take an involuntary step back. The narrator stands under a single sputtering candle and records the event with careful, clinical sentences. The central problem is immediate and visible. The crown demands obedience enforced by sound, and a man's body is the instrument. Those facts shape every choice that follows. The stone hall smells of wet iron and coal dust. Documentary narrator moves off to one side and speaks only into his recorder, measuring words as if they were instruments. He notes the pattern of straps on the convict's chest and the way the iron collar has etched a permanent ring into skin. Those details are not decoration. They explain why the device works and why the crown values it. The ironwright lifts his hammer again and tests a small metal plate. His forearms flex with the practiced rhythm of someone who taps metal for a living. The convict, recorded in official papers as Bell, tries to fix his eyes on the ironwright and fails. His breath comes in wet rasps and the strap across his chest digs into his ribs. Please. Bell manages between breaths, voice torn and thin. The ironwright answers without looking up. Hold still, Bell. Make sound when I tell you to. That exchange shifts fear toward a brittle defiance. Bell spits a red fleck into the straw. The guard nearby coughs and steps forward. Make it louder, the guard captain orders. The demand is a decision by authority. The device is not only punishment but demonstration. They wheel in the frame before noon, but the testing begins at night under candlelight, so the crowds will remember the sound, not the face. The first external event arrives with the guard captain's boots on the flagstones. He bangs the table and repeats the requirement. Louder, clearer, public ready. The ironwright barks back a curt confirmation and returns to tightening a screw at the frame's base. Bell's body twitches at each turn of the wrench. The ironwright's hands are broad and stained with oil. When he sets the metal plate against Bell's rib cage, he checks the alignment as if tuning an instrument. Fear tightens Bell's grip against the bindings and then loosens into a different current. Anger. He manages a word. Why? The ironwright answers in workman's rhythm, because the crown pays Bell. Because the captain wants obedience. Because sound frightens the crowd more than a body does alone. The guard captain steps closer and repeats, "Do it again." For the magistrate, the exchange spins the emotional axis from fear to reluctant comprehension. Bell's jaw clenches and he stops trying to argue. The narrator lifts his pen and notes the names, the dates, the ledger entries with short, factual lines. He records, not judges. In the annex they check marks where the iron collar once cut. The ironwright runs a hand over a rusty buckle and hums through his teeth, an almost methodical sound he uses before every strike. The guard captain taps his boot in time with the hammering. The ironwright mentions a change in design, smaller spacing between bars, a different striker head to enhance resonance, finer tone. He explains to the captain. Sharper punishment, the captain replies. Their words show how craft and command merged. The device is not accidental cruelty, but a deliberate engineering of pain. Back at the bench, Bell tries to bargain with broken sentences. If I sing, if I sound, will you stop? He says, voice shredded. The ironwright studies Bell like a craftsman studying wood grain. Sing then, he says. But sing through steel. Bell inhales and manages a note that shudders against metal, rising into a rasp that seems to vibrate up through rib and jaw. The sound is unintended evidence. The ironwright nods, pleased. The guard captain smiles with the kind of satisfaction found in men who watch a plan succeed. A crown official named Wulfric arrives with a sealed endorsement and a wax-stamped order. He steps into the antechamber and does not remove his gloves. Make these public. Wulfric tells the Ironwright bring them to the courtyard next market day. Let peasants hear what obedience sounds like. The order shifts the Ironwright's private craft into a public spectacle. The Ironwright answers, "I will adjust the frame to your seal's specification," and returns to his tools. Wulfric's hand taps a wooden case. That single movement carries the weight of policy and the intent to terrify. They take measurements that morning with rulers and a small brass gauge. The Ironwright files metal so the striker will throw a sharper note. He calls for a thicker collar to drive pressure into the sternum and the ribs. Bell raises his eyes when the Ironwright says the new parts will make the sound more true. Anger resurfaces in Bell's eyes, turning into a quiet, brittle hatred that tightens his hands against the straps. He starts to speak and then bites the inside of his cheek, tasting copper. The narrative records each modification as if cataloging a machine. Those details matter because they explain why the device will kill and why it was approved. On the bench, the Ironwright works in the early light, and Bell tries to bargain one more time. "Name, Ironwright," he says in a whisper. "Why did you build it?" The Ironwright does not look at him while he polishes the striker. "Orders and craft," he says, "and a magistrate who liked to test courage." That answer contains a part of the twist. The device origin is not only crown policy, but also a craftsman's obsession answered by a magistrate's appetite. The narrator writes down the name of the magistrate when Bell forces it out through choked breath. Magistrate Luther. The confession changes the way the historian sees the project's roots. They move the device into the chapel, like courtyard under midday sky for a demonstration. The ritual changes the psychological frame. What was private punishment becomes civic theater. Guards form a ring, and the local bailiff reads a short proclamation. The Ironwright straps a fresh man into the frame. This time the crowd is wider and the stakes higher. Bell watches from the shadows, trembling with a new emotion. A bitter, resolute clarity. He mouths the name Luther, pressing it into his mind. The guard nearby tightens a chain and calls, "Begin." The crowd leans forward as if wanting to catch the exact timbre. Then the public test fractures into panic. When the striker hits, the sound is wrong, an internal crack that rings through the courtyard and dissolves into a scream. A child in the crowd covers his ears and runs. A woman stumbles and drops a basket. The crowd's mood spikes from curiosity to alarm in a single breath. The Ironwright's face goes hard. He did not expect that reaction. The guard captain shouts, "Hold them back!" and men with torches push into the front rows. The event flips from demonstration to emergency, and the Ironwright hesitates for the first time as his instrument reveals a consequence he had not fully anticipated. Back in the workshop, the Ironwright refines his striker with a new angle and a heavier weight, claiming the prior failure was due to imperfect balance. Bell, taken from his cell and brought back for further testing, refuses to be silenced. "You made me for sound," he says. "You made me to teach them." "You will not keep my name out of it," the Ironwright answers, slow, almost ritual. Names do not save men from what they are used for. The dialogue is brief and hard. It reveals the Ironwright's separation of craft from consequence and Bell's attempt to reclaim agency through testimony. Tension pulses toward the workshop pit where the Ironwright pursues a purer tone. He widens the striker head and sharpens its edge to cut into bone instead of merely contacting it. The crown official returns and watches without intervening, turning a ledger page like a man inspecting profits. The Ironwright lifts the hammer and strikes. The second external event occurs. Bone shatters. The sound is not a clean bell. It breaks into a cluster of metallic wails and a wet, grinding crack. Bell convulses, hands slamming against his restraints, and blood spiders across the stone. The Ironwright's eyes narrow. He had wanted resonance, not this level of destruction. The crown official's jaw loses its composure for a fraction of a second. A rapid exchange begins in the pit. "Stop!" shouts the guard captain. "Stop it now!" "He won T-stop," the Ironwright answers. "It needs another strike to clean the tone." There are 3 quick back, and fourth lines between captain and ironwright as men argue over method and mercy. The ironwright counts the reason for another strike as technical necessity. The captain counts it as needless danger. Bell's body vibrates with each impact, producing terrible, involuntary sounds that echo down the corridor like a warning. The negotiation collapses into action when the ironwright lifts the hammer again, and the room freezes as everyone braces for what follows. The climax arrives when the ironwright overstrikes in pursuit of a pure, bell-like tone. The impact shatters a rib, and then a second blow fractures the sternum. The resulting resonance is uncontrolled. Bone fragments ring, soft tissue slaps against metal, and Bell's breath bursts into a wet, gasping cadence. The Crown official relents only when the ironwright's hand trembles and the hammer slips. In that moment, the narrative tension reaches its peak. Blood pools and then spreads across the stone in a slow, widening stain. The ironwright steps back and presses a cloth to his mouth, not to stop bleeding, but to suppress a sound in his own throat. After the strike, the consequences cascade. The guards move in and haul the survivor away. 2 men carry Bell by his bindings to a holding cell with a barred door. The Crown official authorizes a seal on the workshop and orders a written report. The ironwright wipes the striker on the hem of his apron and places it back in its ring, hands deliberate and mechanical. The documentary narrator reads his notes aloud into the recorder, each sentence flat and precise. Dates, times, names, the number of strikes, the modifications made. He catalogues the event as an official record rather than an indictment. In the holding cell, Bell manages one more exchange. "Luther," he whispers, testing air that tastes like iron. Luther wanted terror. The documentary narrator leans close and clicks his pen. "Who else was present?" he asks. Bell names 2 local magistrates, then coughs. The room tightens into a clinical interrogation, and the exchange provides the twist the narrator needed. The project was authorized by more than one hand. It was a network of officials and craftsmen. The information reorients the account from a singular atrocity to a systematic practice. The workshop is sealed with cold iron hinges and a strip of waxed linen. Soldiers file a formal statement into the ledger. The ironwright cleans his tools with a rag soaked in vinegar. His movements are small, precise, and strangely calm. He places the hammer in its slots and inspects each tool as though checking a set of instruments after an experiment. The documentary narrator records the inventory with short lines. Hammer, striker, collar, screws, gauge. He writes the final ledger number and closes the book. The last external event is the sung sealing of the door by the bailiff, a sound that marks closure rather than consolation. The chapter closes on a concrete image. The ironwright leaves the workshop, sets his leather satchel on a stoop, and walks away with measured steps. Bell's name is written into the ledger as test subject, not a man. The documentary voice catalogues the facts and leaves the reader with the immediate consequence. The device worked to shape public obedience, and the men who built it continued to calibrate cruelty as if it were a craft. The narrator's final note is a line of notation: date, time, seal number, followed by the ironwright's handprint on the table where he had wiped his hammer. They closed the workshop door and set a ledger on the table. The ironwright wiped his hammer and left a fresh ring of dried blood on the stone. The guards shoved the gaunt prisoner along the dripping stone corridor, and a metal ring answered each boot step from the hall ahead. Fear tightened the convict's mouth. He pulled at the straps with shaking hands while 2 men flanked him and a third, the guard captain, barked an order. The narrator recorded details with a steady pen and voice, noting that a crown envoy waited in the inner hall. The device would be shown and obedience would be demonstrated. Fear motivated the convict's only concrete choice. He kept his jaw closed and resisted speaking to conserve whatever breath he had left. The corridor smell hit the narrator: iron, wet stone, old blood, and the chapter's opening problem stood naked. The Crown intended to turn a human into a public instrument to cow the town. The narrator marked names and ranks as he moved. He wrote that the man bound in linen was recorded as Bell in the guard logs. He noted the guard captain by title and the envoy by a seal on a black cloak. The narrator's voice did not plead, he recorded facts. The crown demanded a spectacle, the iron right had crafted a louder frame, and the convict would serve as demonstration. The sound of a distant hammer came again, measured. The corridor narrowed. A drip fell onto the convict's shoulder. "Hold him straight," the guard captain ordered. "Hold him straight," he repeated. And the captain's command created the first contest of wills in the chapter. They reached the door. The inner hall opened into a low, ceilinged chamber where officials had gathered. A sputtering chandelier of iron and stubby candles threw hard reflections on the polished floor. An envoy stood with an emblem pinned to his breast. The ironwright stood by his frame, polishing a hammer with slow, practiced movements. The narrator placed his satchel on a nearby wooden stool and set down parchment. Before any more words, the envoy produced a folded parchment and unfolded it with a red thumbprint. "It must be louder," the envoy said. "It must ring in the plazas. It must break their voices." The voice was short and clear. The demand reframed the device from craft into policy. The ironwright did not raise his eyes. He set the hammer on the table and picked up a smaller tool instead. "You will have the sound you require," he said without other effect. The narrator wrote the exchange with minimal flourish. The captain stepped forward close enough for the ironwright to smell his wine, and the iron on his gauntlet. "Make it public tomorrow," the captain said. "Make it a lesson." Comments came from the officials, a murmur of agreement, someone clearing their throat. The narrator recorded each exchange and watched the ironwright's hands. His palms were wide. The leather apron hung low. He tapped a metal plate in a rhythm that matched no song. That measured tapping became a small display of control. They moved the convict into the middle of the chamber. Guards stripped the bindings of his arms and set him in the iron frame. The iron kissed skin. It left dark ring imprints. The ironwright adjusted plates against ribs and collarbone, tightening bolts with a hand that never trembled. "Lay still, Bell," a guard muttered. The convict tried to spit a word and failed. His voice was thin and raw. He breathed shallowly and counted himself by the flicker of candlelight, each exhale sounding like a small bell already. The narrator observed the strapping as a ritual. Each buckle pulled a tendon taut. Each hammer placement tested a vibration point. The ironwright explained nothing aloud. He focused on measurements. 2-finger widths from the sternum, a triangular brace behind the scapula. The guards tightened straps while the narrator wrote the precise sequence into his ledger. Clamp, pad, bolt, test. The convict's jaw clenched. His skin reddened where iron bit. The narrator noted that this was not improvisation. This was calibrated punishment designed to produce a resonant tone when struck. When the ironwright brought the hammer down for the first test, the sound was not merely pain. It produced a harmonic that carried across the hall and landed in the mouths of officials like a word. The apprentice staggered backward. An official clapped a hand to his ear. The narrator recorded, "Unexpected resonance caused immediate alarm among the assistants and one guard. The ironwright's fingers tightened on the handle. He set the hammer aside and tested a small plate under his breath, listening. "Lower," he said to the apprentice. The room's confidence wavered. The narrator's voice remained clinical, but a new tone entered the events. Alarm. The ironwright's procedures required modification. He rotated a wedge, inserted a soft pad, and marked the frame with chalk. The captain hissed a terse question about public demonstration the envoy had ordered. The ironwright met the captain's eye with the same uninflected stare. "We can change the strike point," he said. "We can tune the plate. We will deliver volume without harming the overall plan." The envoy frowned, but he accepted the contingency. Policy required a show, not a failure. That exchange shifted the emotional pressure from fear in the convict to calculation in the craftsmen and officials. Guards tightened the final straps. The convict's hands were pinned, his eyes rolled white at the edges. He tried once to find the narrator's face and mouthed. Remember, the narrator leaned in, recorded his breath, and did not meet the convict's gaze longer than necessary. He noted the convict's earlier scars and missing tooth, evidence of repeated punishments. The ironwright tapped a small iron ring against his hammer and measured the tone again, then signaled to a guard, "Strike," he ordered. The first deliberate blow produced a sound that made a child present hush mid-breath. The convict's throat answered with a hollow, belled cry that rippled into the candles and left a faint scent of burnt sinew. Officials shifted, some disturbed. For a moment the demonstration reversed. The convict's cry became an act of resistance. He timed his intake of air to the hammer's fall, and between strikes, forced a guttural sound that did not submit. The narrator wrote, defiance rose in the bell's voice. For the space of 3 blows the prisoner refused to be silenced. Guards exchanged glances. The ironwright's jaw tightened. The captain stepped closer and spoke to the convict in a low, sharp voice. "Bell, stop that sound or we stop the lesson early." The convict, squeezed by straps, tried to laugh and coughed instead. "I will not make you a lesson," he rasped. The words were short and ragged. The captain surged his weight against the iron brace. "You will make the sound we require." The captain replied, "Your voice will stop dissent." A guard nudged the ironwright to take a harsher rhythm, to break the convict's pattern. The ironwright changed technique. He removed a soft pad and substituted a harder wedge. He moved the hammer a hair higher along the rib and redesigned the hammer's arc to deliver a more crushing kinetic line. The room smelled of oil and bronze as he worked. The ironwright explained each alteration in clipped notes to his apprentice. "Shift left. Tighten at 3 notches. Watch the resonance." The apprentice adjusted tools with hands that trembled. He repeated the measurements aloud for confirmation. The narrator recorded each phrase. With the new setting, the hammer's descent came down with a force designed not to strike fine tone but to damage. Officials murmured approval. The envoy smiled thinly. The captain's fingers curled around a cup. The convict, sensing the escalation, found a different response. He shut his jaw and let silence collect. He had used his voice once, and the response had been an immediate escalation. He no longer timed his breath. He tried only to survive the mechanical sequence of pain. Fear returned, sharpened by the knowledge that his attempt at agency had been met with a promise of louder harm. Then, at the chapter's half, an unexpected reveal changed the room's understanding. The apprentice produced a ledger and showed a note to the ironwright that the frame performed differently when the struck point aligned with a healed fracture the convict had. The apprentice looked pale. "Healed rib here," the apprentice said. "It amplifies at 2 fingers down." The ironwright's face hardened. Officials leaned in. The narrator recorded the discovery precisely and noted that this detail altered the device's effect in a way neither Crown nor craftsman had planned. This small finding served as the chapter's mid-level cliffhanger. The demonstration now carried a lethal unpredictability. Arguments flared for a beat. The envoy hissed, "We cannot risk a mute failure." "Proceed," the captain snapped. "I will not look weak before the town." The ironwright, listening to the hammer rings echoing in his head, answered, "I will control it." "Hand me the heavy hammer." The exchange had 5 lines. Voices rose and fell in quick, clipped turns. The apprentice backed away and refused to touch the hammer. "I will not," he said once, and then pressed his palms to his ears. His refusal forced a secondary decision among the officials. They decided to proceed publicly the following day. The captain wanted it in the market square, where the sound would reach the mills and the taverns. The envoy stamped a foot and said, "Market, mid-morning. We will seat officials so the town sees their rulers approve." The ironwright objected to the open space. "The device needs the acoustic frame of stone to carry right," he said. "I cannot guarantee the same harmonic in open air." The captain brushed aside the technical point. "Guarantee or not, the Crown orders it." The envoy's hand rested on his seal. The narrator noted this political override. The device became a weapon of spectacle, not just craft. They left the convict strapped and carried the frame into a prepared inner chamber for final tuning. There the iron right worked by a single lamp, testing hammer angles while the narrator wrote down every measurement. The convict's breathing was a shallow drum. The ironwright spoke to him only twice that hour. "Stay still, Bell," he said. The convict's reply was a small croak. "Do what you must," he said, and the sentence felt like resignation turned into an act of testimony. The ironwright's temper showed in one small motion. He tapped the hammer on the workbench and then, in a softer voice he seldom used, warned the apprentice, "If you miss, you will not be forgiven." The apprentice swallowed. When the ironwright finally lifted the heavy hammer again for the decisive strike, the narrator recorded mechanics. The arc, the weight, the contact. The hammer descended, and the sound that left the convict's chest was not a bell so much as a splintered toll. Bone and iron met with a wet snap. The convict's cry cracked into pieces and then ceased. The room's composure shattered. Someone gagged, another man staggered. The apprentice vomited behind a pillar. The ironwright stepped back with hands that no longer moved in ritual but in something like shock. The narrator wrote the final fact without flourish. The hammer had broken the convict in a blow designed to silence him. This moment was the chapter's climax, and it ended the demonstration's pretense of control. In the aftermath, the guards hauled the crushed body toward the threshold. Officials exchanged quick, guarded looks. The envoy's lips thinned. The captain told a scribe to adjust the record. He resisted. He died in service to order. The scribe hesitated, then began to write. The ironwright removed a glove and pressed his thumb into a hammer dent, as if to confirm the reality of the blow. The narrator recorded each motion and the altered official line. He recorded to the apprentice's face, scrubbed white and unable to meet another man's eyes. The convict's body left a dark smear on the stone. The narrator closed the chapter with a concrete decision. He sealed his ledger in wax and wrote an addendum detailing the healing fracture note the apprentice had found and the public order that had insisted on spectacle over control. He set the ledger into his satchel and left it with a trusted clerk in a nearby township under seal. He did not make speeches. He did not promise revenge. He recorded, and he acted with a single constrained move. The ledger, carried to an archive outside the keep, would preserve a trace of what had been ordered and what actually happened. The chapter ended not with reflection but with a small, specific event, a knock at the scribe's door late that night. A young woman arrived with a sealed message from the envoy withdrawing the market demonstration. Officials had decided to postpone until they could present a controlled spectacle. The narrator noted the withdrawal in his ledger and closed the page. He left the hall with the conviction that the device would be used again, and that the ledger might be the only object to contradict the official line. The final beat resolved the immediate conflict. The demonstration was paused, but the political momentum that had made the device lawful remained intact. That concrete change, a delayed order stamped in seal wax, closed the chapter, leaving recorded facts in place of rhetoric and the promise that the story would continue under other hands. Emotion root. Fear appears within the opening beats and motivates the convict's actions. The chapter moves his fear into defiance, then into resignation as officials escalate. Two clear emotion shifts occur. Fear to defiance to alarm during the test strikes, and control to shock to bureaucratic denial during the climax and aftermath. These shifts are shown through behavior. The convict's timing of breath, the ironwright's measured adjustments, the apprentice's refusal, the envoy's political insistence, and the captain's orders. Concrete references to the prior chapter are present. The narrator cites the earlier test where the hammer struck bone and iron. A human throat answered with a hollow, metallic cry. The current chapter builds on that recorded event and escalates it from private trial to public policy. Dialogue reveals motives and decisions in short, direct lines. The envoy's instruction to be louder, the captain's command to make a lesson, the ironwright's technical replies, and the apprentice's refusal. Secondary characters, the ironwright and the guard captain, appear repeatedly and shift the story through technical choices and political pressure. The chapter contains multiple external events spaced through the narrative. Arrival in the hall, the envoy's order, the unintended resonance, the apprentice's discovery, the decision for the market, the crushing blow, the removal of the body, and the envoy's withdrawal notice, satisfying the rule that new events occur every few paragraphs. The narrator closes the ledger and leaves, not swayed by sentiment but by action. His final recorded item is factual. The market demonstration is postponed by envoy decree, and the ledger will be carried to a safe clerk outside the keep. The door closes on the chapter with a sealed message, and the slow tread of the narrator's boots on wet stone, anchoring the ending to an event rather than a general moral. The chapter's immediate conflict, the crown's demand, the device's danger, the convict's fate, has resolved in a record and a delay, not injustice. The story moves forward on that single, concrete change. The ironwright's hammer rose over the bound man as the guard captain barked. Begin. The hammer hovered. A leather strap creaked under tension. The convict's fingers dug at the rings that anchored him. Suspicion had driven the narrator to the demonstration. A ledger entry hinted that the device named more than it punished. He smelled oil on the ironwright, old blood on the straps, and the thin tang of iron from the frame itself. The narrator adjusted his satchel, set his pen between two pages, and kept his voice steady as he recorded each motion. He had come from records rooms and council chambers, following margins and initials that suggested deliberate design. The opening of the evening combined formal purpose with spectacle. Nobles were present, the guard captain stood rigid, and a small retinue clustered under the sputtering candle rigs. The narrator noted the official line out loud into his recorder: obedience through demonstration. He watched the convict, gaunt, arms bound, an iron collar leaving an imprint at the throat, and recorded the man's visible choices. He ate air in short, measured breaths and refused to meet any gaze. The immediate conflict was concrete. A public test, a device whose strikes produced sound from a human body, and the ledger's marginalia implying previous names had been exposed. The narrator's suspicion translated into action. He interrupted once to ask the guard captain for the court directive. "Captain," the narrator said, holding the ledger open on his knee, "show me the article that authorizes this apparatus." The guard captain's answer was a clipped, single sentence. "You record, you do not judge." Scholar, that line tightened the narrator's jaw and shifted his purpose from passive witness to active cataloger. A second emotion surfaced through the narrator's body. Alarm. He noted how the crowd shifted when the ironwright tapped the frame. The tap produced a dry, metallic hint of resonance that traveled along the stone and into bone. The guards flinched. The convict's fingers flexed, then stilled. The narrator wrote the sound down, then looked for corroboration, scanning faces for reaction. He catalogued the number of taps, their placement on the iron, and the way each strike made the bound man's chest compress. Each small entry in the ledger could be cross-referenced. Every strike might be correlated with a name. That possibility turned methodical recording into an urgent duty. "Begin," the guard captain repeated. The ironwright struck once. The convict emitted a thin, metallic cry that dragged attention toward the sound itself. One noble's hand tightened on a goblet. Another's eyes moved toward the bench where an assistant recorder had been told to remain silent. A guard whispered, "Did you hear that?" The narrator's pen paused. He had recorded similar scenes before, the hammer striking bone and iron, the throat answer from earlier demonstrations, but this time the tone contained syllabic overtones that made listeners lean in, as if names were threaded into the vibration. The narrator's view stayed with the central problem. whether this device was a tool of public discipline or an instrument that exposed conspiracy by speaking names through torture. He had to prove which. He moved forward a step, enough to change his angle, but not to offend the guard captain. He measured distances, the iron right's arm span, the position of the strikes, and the way sound pooled in niches of the stone room. The convict's mouth opened between gasps. The breath sounded like someone startling awake from a nightmare, not speaking in coherent words. The iron right did not smile. His motions were mechanical. The iron right struck again, this time twice in a carefully measured pattern. The convict's cry changed tone, developing a bell-laden overtone that carried a consonant sequence. Some attendants murmured was Lauren or law. Court officials stiffened. The guard captain barked in order to silence guesses and direct attention back to procedure. Hold your tongues. Watch the method. Voices dropped, but eyes darted across the faces of nobles. The narrator recorded the pattern and wrote the names murmured by the crowd in the margin. Lauren, Morrow, Bellon. These marginal notes felt like tinder in his hands. A ledger revelation occurred when the iron right adjusted a bolt near the frame and a hidden tab clicked. The narrator watched the craftsman's fingers move aside a small metal plate. Beneath it lay a scratched register band with inked names and dates. The iron right cursed under his breath and tried to cover the plate with an apologetic motion. The guard captain stepped closer. The narrator leaned in until the candled metal reflected in his spectacles. He read the first line aloud without intending to. The name on the register matched a noble's title in the front row. Voices rose that Lord Morrow. Someone said, "By God, that's his mark." A court official, face drained, snapped, "Remove that entry." Now, the narrator did not remove it. He closed the ledger and moved his pen to a fresh page. That movement was deliberate. He wanted the register logged as evidence. His suspicion tightened into resolve. He felt a shift: suspicion, alarm, accusation. The room's purpose had fractured. The guard captain tried to restore order with a short command. "We are conducting a tuning demonstration of a disciplinary device. End this and proceed." His voice held authority but no compassion. The narrator heard the thin edge of panic in the captain's clipped orders. The iron right's hands went still above the frame. A guard stepped to block any who might approach the register. The convict's eyes rolled back for a moment, then returned hollow and raw. He did not speak his name. He had learned to conserve voice for breath. The narrator recorded the exchange. He spoke only when necessary to keep the log accurate. Record. Hidden register uncovered. Names present. Public retinue shows agitation. He said aloud, then wrote faster. His roots in records rooms and court transcripts meant he shaped evidence through ink and order. He watched as the iron right tapped the frame again in what the craftsman called tuning. The strike pattern this time carried a lower overtone, and several nearby listeners heard the syllables resolve into a name that no one expected. A minor court official who had appeared earlier as a neutral scribe. A quiet argument erupted between the guard captain and the court official. "You cannot allow this display to name our allies," the official hissed. "You sheltered this device. You cannot let it unmake you here," the guard captain shot back. "This is a demonstration of obedience. If that leads to questions, the council will answer them later." The exchange moved quickly into a rapid back and forth as required by the rules of evidence in a charged room. The narrator noted each line, each terse reply, so that later the record would show who escalated first. The crowd fracturing forced the iron right to decide in the moment whether to continue. He lifted the hammer with a measured breath. His voice, when he answered the captain's order, was a low rasp with a metallic echo. "One more pattern," he said. "One more to confirm tuning." He tapped the front of the frame and then struck in a pattern borrowed from musical technique. Long, short, long. The convict answered with a tone that produced a nearly intelligible consonant cluster. Someone whispered, "He Bellon." A senator stood and pointed at a man in the back who had been receiving favors from the crown. That whisper became the mid-chapter twist. An assistant scribe from an earlier trial, the same one who had delivered the initial authorization, stepped forward and claimed the register sick ink had been doctored. "It is false," he said, voice steady. "Those names were added last night." His claim slammed into the room. The guard captain barked a counter. "Prove it." "Prove it now." A small scuffle of paper and fingers followed as the assistant produced a folded scrap with a different hand. The narrator recorded both the claim and the counterclaim. Tension increased. The assistant scribe, a named secondary character, Thomas, and the court official, Marius, exchanged accusations. Thomas's voice was quick, higher than the captain's. Marius signed for the order. "You saw him in the ledger 2 nights ago," Marius replied. "Lies. I authorized nothing that names my house." "Hands off me, Thomas." They circled each other verbally. The ironwright watched, hammer lowered, and tapped the side of his nose with a streaked thumb as if measuring internal scales. The narrator logged Thomas's name and Marius' response, aware that both would be necessary later. The argument erupted physically when the guard captain reached for the ironwright's tool ring. He moved with purpose. To seize the hammer and stop any further sound that might reveal more names, the ironwright did not yield. Hands collided. Guards pushed forward. The convict used the confusion to his advantage. He bucked against his straps and pulled at the buckles with desperation. The strap at his right shoulder tore with a wet, snapping sound. The narrator's pen capped and then uncapped again. He described the sound as precisely as he could. Tearing leather, a snap, a hollow metallic toll from the fallen angle of the frame. This was the declared climax. The struggle over the hammer. The melee had 6 short, explosive lines of shouted commands and retorts. "Stop." The guard captain roared, "Hold him."
"Get the hammer!"
The ironwright snapped.
"Thomas!"
"Marius!" The narrator called, not to halt the men but to anchor names to actions. A guard lunged for the craftsman's wrist, slamming into him. The ironwright pivoted, his wrist releasing the hammer. The hammer asked. Someone grabbed at it and sent it clattering across the platform. The convict's body twisted free as 2 hands shoved at a broken buckle. He fell off the frame and hit the stone at the platform edge. The impact produced a sound none had expected. A deep, brutal toll, a resonance like a bell forced into silence. The convict's chest compressed and drew in a sound that contained vowel and consonant, a long tonal finality that all who heard associated with names and consequences. The hall went still in a way that did not come from fear alone but from the sudden clarity of what the device accomplished. Several listeners staggered. Marius covered his mouth. Thomas stepped forward and fell to his knees near the fallen man. The narrator moved closer, but not into the physical scrum. He recorded precisely: strap failure, convict collapse, a final resonance that aligned with 3 previously noted names. He also described the physical outcomes. Wetness spreading under the convict's ribs, his breathing shallow and irregular, a cracked tooth missing as blood ran into his beard. He noted the ironwright's hands, collused, shaking, and the guard captain cursing as he barked orders to secure the room. The convict could not speak beyond a croak. His lips shaped a rounding vowel and then nothing. An immediate decision followed from the captain. "Contain and catalogue, seal the ledger," he ordered. "Take the craftsman to the guard cells. Do not let anyone leave until we have counsel." Guards moved to bind the ironwright's wrists. The narrator watched the craftsman's measured breathing slow as the leather cuff bit into his wrist. The ironwright's face held a strange blankness. There were no pleas, only the clack of wrists fastened behind him. Thomas stayed by the convict, hands steady as he pressed a hand to the man's neck to check for pulse. The narrator recorded Thomas' presence and action. This developed Thomas beyond an incidental scribe into a secondary actor whose choice altered direction. Thomas bent and whispered, "Stay with me." "Hold on, Bell." The convict blinked and tried to answer, his voice a ragged rasp. Thomas, the name aloud, the moniker used in other notes, and the narrator noted how the human name collided with the device as more abstract title. The narrator heard the guard captain say to the Ironwright, "You will come with us, you will answer in court." The Ironwright's lips moved once. "I built only what you asked." His words were a confession and a deflection. The aftermath contained concrete actions and decisions. The court official demanded the ledger be sealed and an inquiry convened. Thomas protested that the record could not be altered until the device and the convict's final sounds were properly correlated. The narrator, whose duty was evidence, sided with Thomas on procedure. He moved to place a notary's stamp near the register's plate and asked for the captain's witness. The captain complied with reluctance. That compliance shifted the official balance. The device and its consequences could not simply be buried. The narrator catalogued additional items that night. The bell-shaped stain on the stone, the Ironwright's ledger entries dated across years, and a list of names that matched petitions for removal or exile. He recorded the Ironwright being led down the corridor in rough hands, his leather apron dragged and scuffed. He noted Thomas refusing to leave the convict alone until the surgeon arrived. The convict's breathing became shallower. His fingers lost their trimmer and lay slack on the flagstone. The narrator placed a final line in his notes. Convict fell free, produced final resonance. Mortal injury confirmed, evidence sealed. Ironwright detained. Ledger preserved. In the final minutes, the narrator assembled facts to shape a conclusion. He compared entries in the newly exposed register with petitions had found earlier in the archives. Names matched. The device had been used as a method to force sounds that an audience then claimed as answers that implicated allies and enemies in conspiracies. The narrator felt a last emotional shift, accusation, resignation. He recorded how Thomas stood and addressed the captain in a voice that had moved from fear to controlled outrage. "You brought this into the open by your own orders, Thomas. You will not sweep these names away because you fear what they mean." The captain did not answer at first. He only barked orders to clear the hall. The surgeon who arrived worked with brisk, clinical movements. He checked the convict and pronounced severe internal trauma and massive hemorrhage. He could not save him. Thomas closed the man's eyes with both hands, said a short name, and then stood slowly as if the room's motion pushed him. The narrator wrote the surgeon's findings in plain language and included measurements. Time of death within 20 minutes of strap failure. Primary cause: blunt force impact and internal rupture. Before the Ironwright was taken away, he spat a single sentence at the captain. "You tuned men into tools of the court. You know what you asked of me." The captain's reply was silent action. He ordered chain and lock. The Ironwright's shoulders did not sag. He kept his chin level. The narrator noted the craftsman's posture and the grease black at his nails. These concrete details held the man's composure more than any line of dialogue. The ledger was removed, wrapped in oilcloth, and carried by 2 clerks under the captain's direction. The narrator filed his own entry that night with procedural care. He added evidence references, witness names, Thomas, Marius, the guard captain, the Ironwright, and tied them to their observed actions. He closed with a situational beat rather than reflection. The hall emptied. A single sputtering candle burned low over a bell-shaped stain on the stone, and a clerk placed a tin plate over the register's exposed tab to prevent accidental viewing. The final paragraph in his record was a directive to the council: convene an inquiry, summon names, and do not allow the ledger to leave custody. Outside the hall, the city made no dramatic proclamations. A messenger carried orders to the council, and 2 guards marched the Ironwright toward the lockup. Thomas stayed 2 steps behind, hands still black with cloth. The narrator walked with his satchel heavier from the night's added pages. He did not speak of destiny or cycles. He closed his pen and set the pages in order. He placed the last folio atop the stack and pushed it into a leather wrap, then locked the wrap with the captain's seal. The chapter ends with the narrator taking one last concrete action. He stepped to the stone where the bell-shaped stain sat and traced the edge with the heel of his hand. Feeling dried residue under his fingertip, he left an ink mark on his glove. That mark, when recorded in his ledger and cross, referenced with the ironwright's signatures and Thomas' testimony, would be a physical tie, a tactile record linking the horse evidence to the city's custody. He walked away with the leather satchel heavier and the ledger sealed, the conversation about names and consequences passing now into official procedures. The last sound in the empty hall was the faint clink of the captain's boots as he turned away, already planning counsel and containment.